Is it another kind of life form?
100%, 100%. And that's what our ancestors were trying to articulate. Again, we're not alone in our lack of vocabulary here. They also were trying to place a face on the phenomenon, and they did their very best to give us what they had. But I remain convinced that if we look at the bloody footprints in the snow, these beings, which we called Dubuk, are doing the same things that the quote-unquote aliens are doing, which I can go in that direction too, but we're dealing with the same phenomenon. And I'll go even further, and I tend to ramble, so if I ramble, just tell me to be quiet. But, we're dealing with pregnancy as well. These beings would not just manifest to women, but these women would become possessed by the entity to the point of impregnation.
It sounds like a different kind of life form.
It's something strange, absolutely.
And it also sounds biblical.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And what was occurring was these women were going to their priests, their rabbis, their clergy, and one of the most fascinating but disturbing questions in all of demonology was uttered. They had one case. It was called the Widow of Damona, and she had become possessed by one of these entities that she encountered in a dream. And the entity, this is what they perceived it as. The entity had crawled up in the fetal position in her womb, and upon examination, she had 2 pulses in one body and had 2 heartbeats in one body. And the question that these early demonologists asked themselves was this woman, in fact, pregnant by the entity? Or was she impregnated with it? Now, at the point of exorcism, the consciousness that had possessed her left. But whatever phenomenon we're dealing with in the exorcising of the entity, they also took the fetus that was inside of the womb.
Wow.
So we're dealing with something, again, highly deceptive, and it knows its own. It knew that's one of ours. And so that's why I'm convinced that this entire hybridization program has been looked at upside down. We're looking at the fetuses without trying to understand the consciousness they're putting into them.
Have other cultures talked about similar things?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And one of, not the least of which, is your earlier reference to biblical antiquity, and obviously Genesis 6, Nephilim, Rephaim. And we're being invaded by the seemingly impossible here. And I cannot help to stress that, and yet sometimes I feel like an idiot.
Where are they coming from? Other dimensions, other planetary systems? Where?
I'm not really sold on the ET hypothesis. The only reason we're believing they're ET is because they've told us that. And they've given us a couple maps. But again, if we're going to believe they're ET, then we also have to believe they're dear Aunt Edna, because they've appeared as her as well. They've appeared as deceased loved ones. There are accounts of children being taken by Mickey Mouse. Are they Mickey Mouse? Or is this another mask that the phenomenon is employing in order to groom us into obeying them? If we look at some of these roles, like I had a case study in India where a young woman was being visited by one of these beings, and it had manifested to her in the image of everyone she had been with, like all of her boyfriends and stuff.
How did it know this?
I don't know. This gets back to the knowledge pool that they're operating off of. These beings, and not just what we consider to be demons, but even the ETs, they know the same things, which, again, it points to the fact that we're dealing with a singular intelligence. But both categories, they know when people will die. We even have what are called demonic flights, where they're out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, that mirror to a T what we would consider to be the abduction phenomenon. But the way they know it, and the power structure that even Jacques Vallée has hypothesized, it's present. It's very much present. I was doing a show not too long ago And the host was kind of shooken up. He was real broken up about what I was lecturing about and stuff. Anyways, after the show, we're back in the green room, and he tells his story. He said, he goes, I never thought about this experience until you gave this lecture. This individual, he's familiar with the paranormal, didn't even think anything of this. But he had broken up with a girlfriend, moved across town, didn't think anything of her, deleted her number, got a new job, got new friends. And he said, one night he's just watching TV when there's a knock at the door, and he opens the door, and it's his ex-girlfriend. And so she stays over the night, and he gets up in the morning, she's gone. He goes to work, and it's weird. It's just like experiencers. It's just like the 16th century. He starts to think about what he experienced. Like, what exactly happened, right? Was I in a dream state? Like, I felt like I was just out of my mind.
And was it really her or a shapeshifter, right?
Well, he finally got her phone number. He calls her, and he demands an answer. And he wasn't being mean. He was just curious more than anything. He says, okay, so-and-so, like, what happened? How did you know where I even lived? And she threw profanity at him and told him, I have no idea what you're talking about. That wasn't me, but you're freaking me out. Hung up on him.
Who was it?
What? I don't know.
Or what was it?
Right. I don't know. But this, again, if we get deeper into the research, we see these bloody footprints in the snow. There are behavioral patterns that these beings manifest that transcend the microcosm of what we're calling them, right? It's not just a Dibuk or a Dybbuk. It's not just an incubi or succubi, and it's not just an ET. They're all doing the same things to the same people, right? I mean, and I can go even into this, which is it kind of sums everything up. Like in witch era literature,
sure,
these beings were abducting so-called witches and taking them on what's called demonic flights.
The demons were taking witches?
Absolutely, 100%. Now, this comes out of a book called Eros and Evil by Ariel Masters. It's a part of my reading when I mentor people. But yeah, absolutely, it's the abduction phenomenon, but it's just their interpretation of it. So what happened was that these women were practitioners, and they had made these pacts with so-called demons and corpses. And so in the event that they were called upon to a sabbat, the phenomenon, that's the only way I can describe it because we don't know yet what it is, but the phenomenon itself would take their bodies, take them in a demonic flight, and then it would replace them with a familiar spirit so that the husband would go use the restroom at night and not realize, right, that my wife is actually with them. He would look in the covers, and there is something else in her place that wants to look like his wife. But upon examination, when these beings took these women, they would take them to mountaintops and to gloomy sabbats. But what's so fascinating about Ariel Master's work is he said that during these case studies, many times these women thought they were copulating with corpses and demons. And I need everybody to pay attention to this. This is profound. Up until the frequency fuzzed out, and they realized that this was some form of technology they were dealing with, and that these were not demons. It was a theatrical production designed to manifest to them according to their belief system. And at the moment of technology, the technology fuzzing in and out, they realized that they were being poked and prodded by metallic objects. Now, that is as much of the UFO abduction phenomenon as we know today.
Sure. And it does not sound demonic. It sounds like a totally different grouping of entities.
Right. Something that's masquerading as a demon or a corpse. Now, another behavioral pattern that is pervasive in the research is what they do with the deceased, not just with the ghosts themselves, but Montague Summers and even Father Sinistrari of Amino, both of them encountered entities that were hovering over the recently deceased.
Nathaniel, did you have a difficult or easy time trying to determine the difference between these Dybbuks and demons?
It was difficult at first. Again, I was intellectually trapped within the blueprint I inherited from my belief system. But once I outgrew that and I grew into the data and out of the dogma, it wasn't as hard. I mean, again, if we strip them from the titles, And, we look at them for what they're doing. These are very much the same beings. They employ very much the same technologies. It's so interesting. Early on in my research, I got a hold of one of my favorite researchers in the world, and I asked him, I said, in working with experiencers of UFO abduction, do you ever come across people who had, it seemed like a stupid question now, it does, but back then it was irrelevant. I asked him, I said, okay, you ever had people who claimed to have been visited by entities and they had like biological substances left on their bodies? And he said, absolutely, 100%. And again, what we've done, though, and I don't know why, but what we've done is we've placed debunked victims on one side of the table and then experiencers on the other, not realizing that if we take off the mask, we have a lot more case studies to involve into our research that's outside of what we're, allowed to talk about or allowed to, discuss in modernity. But it's the same phenomenon. And I think that's what disturbs me more than anything is, okay, are we being manipulated as a species? And that's what's really captivated my attention as of late.
Now, in these situations, what are you more concerned about, the demons or the Dybbuks?
All of the above. See, again, there's a power structure that Jacques Vallée and other researchers, even Dr. Crowley Turner, which is one of my heroes in the field, they all talk about this control mechanism the phenomenon employs in its victims, and it's very true, very true. I mean, even with the debug phenomenon, there was one case where a woman who had never been to Paris before vividly remembers being there and eating some bread and drinking the wine and enjoying the culinary delights, and yet she's never been there. And so what we're looking at, again, we would consider that to be a screen memory. We just called it something completely different. So there's a control mechanism where, especially with these women and the debug phenomenon, where they didn't want these women to realize what happened to them.
Speaking in foreign tongue, Nathaniel, have you come across that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a technical term for it, but especially in Pentecostalism, I noticed that and a host of other manifestations that were puzzling. I grew up in something very similar. I think there is a profound contrast between being possessed by a malevolent entity and with what some of their practices include. When you're getting phone calls in the morning, 2 in the morning, and my number's not publicly listed anyways, but I'm getting phone calls from people threatening me because of some of the things that I've been exposing. But again, that it's a reference to the control system the phenomenon employs when it feels threatened.